Take the bus, my father said, tossing a crumpled card onto the driveway gravel. Bentleys do not carry failures. He slammed the heavy door of the white flying spur right in my face, the lock clicking with a sound that felt like a gunshot. I stood there in my cap and gown, watching my family drive off to my own graduation without me. 6 hours later, the dean of the university would pause the ceremony to announce the single largest donation in the school history made by the youngest self-made billionaire in Georgia. When he called my name, my father dropped his phone, my mother choked on her champagne, and my sister, the golden child, realized that the Bentley they were driving was technically already mine. But before I tell you how I seized their assets and evicted them from the house I secretly bought, let me take you back to this morning, to the moment they tried to break me for the very last time. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to succeed in silence while everyone else doubted you. The morning sun over Buckhead usually felt like a promise, but inside the Washington estate, it felt more like an interrogation. The air in the hallway was thick with the scent of Chanel No. 5 and desperation. My mother Patrice was running around like a headless chicken, screaming at the housekeeper about a microscopic wrinkle in her silk dress. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen adjusting the sash on my doctoral robes. I had spent the last 5 years in a lab surviving on coffee and instant noodles, working on a genome sequencing project that Big Pharma had just valued at over $1 billion. But to my parents, I was just Zoe the nerd, the charity case, the daughter who did not know how to marry a baller. Mother swept past me, not even making eye contact. She was holding up a velvet hanger with a dress that cost more than my entire tuition. "Chloe needs the steamer," she barked, thrusting a finger toward the laundry room. "Don't just stand there looking drab, Zoe. Your sister has a photo shoot before we leave." I didn't move. "I am graduating today, Mom," I said, my voice calm but tight. "I am receiving my PhD. Do you think maybe we could focus on that for 5 minutes?" Mother stopped and finally looked at me. Her eyes scanned my outfit, lingering on my comfortable flats with a sneer of disgust. "PhD stands for pretty hard to date," she said with a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Nobody cares about a piece of paper, Zoe. Chloe just hit 50,000 followers on Instagram. That is real influence. That is what brings value to this family. Now go get the steamer before she has a meltdown." I walked into the living room, ignoring her command. My father Desmond was standing by the mirror, adjusting his gold cufflinks. He fancied himself a businessman, a pillar of the Atlanta community, but I knew the truth. I knew he had refinanced this house 3 times. I knew the lease on his car was 2 months behind. I knew he was banking everything on Chloe marrying rich to save them from bankruptcy. He saw me in the reflection and sighed a heavy, disappointed sound that I had heard my entire life. "You look plain," he said, turning around. "We are sitting in the VIP section today. The least you could do is put on some makeup. You are going to embarrass us next to the senator's family." I tightened my grip on my graduation cap. "I am not there to be decoration, Dad. I am the valedictorian. I am giving the speech." Desmond waved his hand dismissively. "Speech," he scoffed. "Nobody listens to the speeches. They look at the shoes and the hair. Why can't you be more like your sister? She understands that image is currency. You are 26 years old, and you look like a librarian who got lost." Just then the front door swung open and in walked Brad. My future brother-in-law. The savior. The man my parents thought was heir to the Remington steel fortune. He was wearing a suit that was too shiny and a smile that did not reach his eyes. In his hand was a bright orange shopping bag. "Babe, I got it!" he shouted, and Chloe came running down the stairs, squealing like a teenager. She was wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously like a wedding gown, clearly trying to upstage everyone at my graduation. Brad handed her the bag. "An Hermes Birkin," he announced, looking directly at my father for approval. "Vintage. Worth 20 grand easily." My mother gasped, clapping her hands. "Oh, Brad, you spoil her." "See, Zoe, this is what a successful man looks like." I watched Chloe tear open the box and pull out the bag. From where I was standing 10 feet away, I could see the stitching was uneven, the hardware was too brassy. It was a fake. A good fake maybe, but definitely not a $20,000 bag. I looked at Brad, and for a split second his mask slipped. He knew I knew. He knew I had an eye for detail. It was what made me a brilliant scientist. But he just smirked, wrapping an arm around Chloe's waist. "Morning, Zoe," he said, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "Ready for your big day? I heard they are giving out degrees for anything these days. Affirmative action is a beautiful thing, isn't it?" The room went silent. My blood boiled. I graduated summa cum laude from undergrad. I published 3 papers in top-tier journals before I turned 25. But to Brad, a mediocre white man who was living off a trust fund that I suspected was empty, I was just a quota hire. My father laughed. "Good one, Brad," he chuckled. "Someone has to tell her the truth. She thinks she is the next Einstein." Brad kissed Chloe on the cheek. "Well, we better get going. I don't want the Bentley sitting in the sun too long. The leather gets hot." We all moved toward the door. I grabbed my bag, expecting to ride with them. It was a 40-minute drive to the university, and my heels, while sensible, were not meant for hiking. We walked out onto the driveway. The white Bentley Flying Spur gleamed in the Georgia sun. It was a beautiful machine, massive and arrogant, just like my father. Brad opened the back door for Chloe. She slid in, arranging her dress so it took up 2/3 of the seat. Mom got in the front. Dad got in the driver's seat. Brad squeezed in next to Chloe. I walked up to the remaining rear door and reached for the handle. It was locked. I pulled again. Nothing. The window rolled down halfway. My father was looking at me in the rearview mirror, wearing his sunglasses. "Dad, unlock the door," I said. "The ceremony starts in an hour." He didn't look at me. He looked at the leather seats. "Look at that dress, Zoe," he said. "It is cheap polyester. It is going to snag the upholstery, and there is no room. Chloe needs space for her photo shoot on the way there." I blinked, thinking this was a joke. "I am the graduate," I said, my voice rising. "This day is literally about me. You are going to make me take an Uber." Brad leaned forward from the back seat, flashing that shark-like grin. "Uber Black is expensive, Zoe," he said. "Do you even have the credit limit for that? Maybe you should try something more within your budget." My father reached into his pocket and pulled out a thin plastic card. He flicked his wrist, and the card sailed through the open window, landing in the dirt near my feet. It was a MARTA Breeze card, a bus pass. "Take the bus," he said, cold and final. "It goes straight to the campus. It will keep you humble. Bentleys don't carry failures." The window rolled up. The engine roared to life. I stood there frozen as the car reversed out of the driveway. I saw Chloe in the back window holding up her fake Birkin, snapping a selfie with the caption, "Likely mocking me." They left me. On my graduation day. They left me standing in the dust of their luxury car, treating me like I was the help they had just fired. I looked down at the bus pass in the dirt. My hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from a cold, hard rage that was spreading through my chest. I bent down and picked it up. It was gritty and scratched. I dusted it off slowly. They thought this was the end of the world for me. They thought this would break me. They had no idea. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It had been vibrating for the last 10 minutes. I looked at the screen. A notification from my bank. Wire transfer received. $1,200,000,000. The acquisition deal with Pfizer had closed 10 minutes ago. I looked at the empty driveway where the Bentley had just disappeared. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I walked down the long driveway toward the bus stop, my head held high. I would take the bus. I would sit on the plastic seat. I would ride to my graduation among the people who actually worked for a living. And when I got there, I was going to buy the bank that held the title to my father's precious Bentley. I was going to buy the mortgage on this house. And I was going to make sure that by the time they got home tonight, they would be the ones needing a bus pass. But first, I had a speech to give. A speech about gratitude. And I knew exactly who I was going to thank. The doors of the MARTA bus hissed open with a weary groan, releasing a blast of stale air that smelled of diesel fuel and damp raincoats. I stepped up, swiping the scratched plastic card my father had thrown in the dirt moments ago. The driver, a man with tired eyes and deep lines etched around his mouth, barely glanced at me as I moved toward the back. The bus was crowded, packed with students rushing to the ceremony and locals heading to their shifts. I found a small space near the rear window, gripping the metal pole as the bus lurched forward, throwing me slightly off balance. My graduation gown was heavy and hot, the polyester sticking to my skin in the humid Georgia air. I looked out the window as we navigated the traffic, watching a sleek black limousine weave effortlessly through the lanes. For a moment, I imagined my parents and sister in the Bentley. They were likely sipping chilled, sparkling water surrounded by hand-stitched leather, laughing about how I was getting what I deserved. The vibration of the bus engine rattled my teeth, a stark contrast to the silent, air-conditioned cocoon they were currently enjoying. A woman standing next to me shifted her weight. She looked exhausted, holding 2 heavy grocery bags that were digging into her palms. Without thinking, I shifted my own stance to give her more room, offering a small, sympathetic smile. She returned it, a flicker of kindness in a hard day. It was in that moment that my phone buzzed against my hip. It was a singular, sharp vibration. I pulled it out, shielding the screen from the prying eyes of the teenager standing next to me. It was the email I had been waiting for. The subject line was simple: transfer complete. I opened it. There it was. The number was so long it almost didn't fit on the screen. $1,200,000,000. The funds from the sale of Aetherios Biotech to Pfizer had officially cleared. I stared at the screen, blinking rapidly. I looked around the bus. I was surrounded by people counting pennies for fare, people worried about rent, people exhausted by the grind of survival. And I was standing there holding a device that told me I could buy this entire bus line and turn it into a private fleet if I wanted to. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. My father had put me on this bus to teach me a lesson about poverty and failure. He wanted me to feel small. He wanted me to feel powerless. Instead, I stood there feeling like a titan in disguise. The grim reality of the peeling linoleum floor and the graffiti on the seatback did not depress me. It grounded me. It reminded me exactly why I had worked 18-hour days in the lab. It was never about the Bentley. It was about never having to ask anyone for permission to exist ever again. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The secret felt heavy and warm, a weapon I was about to unsheath. By the time the bus hissed to a halt at the university gates, I was sweating. The humidity had frizzled the edges of my hair, and my gown was wrinkled from the crush of bodies. I walked the half-mile from the bus stop to the main auditorium, my sensible flats clapping against the pavement. The campus was a sea of black robes and colorful sashes. Families were gathering with balloons and bouquets, taking photos under the oak trees. I scanned the crowd, my heart pounding a slow, steady rhythm of anticipation. I finally spotted them near the east entrance. It was the VIP access point, reserved for major donors and university trustees. My father was there, of course. I watched as he shook hands with a security guard, slipping a folded $100 bill into the man's palm with practiced ease. The guard nodded and unhooked the velvet rope. I quickened my pace, weaving through the crowd to reach them before they disappeared inside. I caught up just as they were stepping onto the red carpet runner. "Dad, Mom," I called out, breathless. "I made it." My mother turned, her face twisting into a grimace as she took in my appearance. "Oh, look at you," she hissed, stepping closer to block me from the view of a passing photographer. "You look like you just ran a marathon in a trash bag." "Your hair is a disaster, Zoe." Chloe, standing next to Brad, was holding her phone up, the ring light attached to the case blindingly bright. She was live streaming to her 50,000 followers. "Hey guys, we are just about to enter the VIP suite," she chirped into the camera, tilting her head to find her best angle. "Daddy just got us the best seats in the house. #graduation goals." I stepped into the frame, trying to stand next to my sister. Chloe immediately shoved me, her perfectly manicured hand digging into my arm. "Ew, Zoe, move. she whispered harshly, covering the microphone. "You are sweating, and you are blocking my light. Go find your seat in general admission." Brad laughed, adjusting his silk tie. "Yeah, Zoe," he said, looking down at me. "The nosebleed section is that way. We have access to the donor lounge. Maybe if you hurry, you can get a seat behind a pillar so no one has to see that dress." My father didn't even look at me. He just gestured for them to keep moving. "Let's go," he said. "We don't want to be associated with the riffraff." They turned their backs on me, the velvet rope snapping back into place, separating us. I stood there for a moment, watching them strut away, secure in their delusion of superiority. I took a deep breath, smoothed the front of my wrinkled gown, and walked to the side entrance. I didn't need the VIP lounge. I needed the stage. The auditorium was cavernous, filled with the hum of 3,000 people. I found my seat in the front row of the graduates, a spot assigned to the valedictorian. I could see my family up in the mezzanine box. They were visibly laughing, taking selfies, and completely ignoring the ceremony unfolding below. My father was pointing at things in the program, probably criticizing the font choice. My mother was reapplying lipstick. Chloe was posing with the fake Birkin bag prominently displayed on the ledge. They looked like royalty surveying their subjects. They had no idea the guillotine was about to drop. The ceremony proceeded with the usual pomp and circumstance. Names were called, applause rippled, and then the dean of the university, a stern woman with gray hair and a voice of steel, stepped up to the podium. She adjusted the microphone and waited for silence. The room went quiet. "Before we conclude today," she began, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, "I have a very special announcement. This university has always prided itself on innovation and excellence. Today, we are honored to announce the receipt of the largest single donation in our institution's history." Up in the VIP box, I saw my father perk up. He leaned over to Brad, whispering something. I could read his lips. Probably the senator's kid, or the Johnson family. He adjusted his suit jacket, ready to applaud for someone he likely wanted to network with. The dean continued. "This gift, totaling $50 million for a new biotechnology research center, comes from a remarkable individual. A student who walked these halls unnoticed, who spent thousands of hours in our labs, and who, as of this morning, has become the youngest self-made billionaire in the state of Georgia." A gasp went through the crowd. A billionaire, sitting among them. The whispers started instantly. Who is it? Is it the tech guy? Is it the heir? My family was now fully attentive, leaning over the railing, scanning the crowd, desperate to identify the new power player. My mother was practically vibrating with excitement, probably already planning how to invite this person to dinner. The dean looked down at her notes, and then she looked directly at me. Her expression softened into a smile of immense pride. "Please join me in thanking and welcoming to the stage the founder of Etherios Biotech and our valedictorian, Dr. Zoe Washington." For a second there was total silence. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I stood up. My legs felt strong. I walked up the stairs to the stage, the sound of my heels now confident and loud on the wood. The applause started slowly, confusion turning into realization, and then it erupted. It was a roar, a standing ovation. I looked up at the VIP box. My father had dropped his phone. It was lying on the floor of the box. His mouth was hanging open, his eyes wide and vacant. My mother was clutching her pearls, her face drained of all color, staring at me as if I had grown a second head. Chloe had stopped live streaming. She was holding her phone, but her hand was limp at her side, her mouth forming a perfect O of shock. Brad looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He was gripping the railing so hard his knuckles were white. I reached the podium and grasped the sides of it. I looked out at the sea of faces, and then I looked up directly into the eyes of the people who had made me take the bus. I leaned into the microphone. "Thank you, Dean," I said, my voice magnified, booming through the hall. "This donation is not just money, it is a message." I paused, letting the words hang there. Growing up, I was taught that worth is determined by what you drive, what you wear, and who you know. I was told that if you don't fit the mold, you belong on the bus, not in the Bentley. I saw my father flinch physically as if I had slapped him from 100 feet away. He looked around wildly, realizing people were starting to turn and look at the VIP box connecting the dots. I continued my voice, steady and cold. But I learned something on those long bus rides. I learned that while some people are busy polishing their image, others are busy building the future. This gift is for the students who take the bus, for the students whose parents don't have connections, for the ones who are told they are failures because they don't have a brand deal. I am investing in you because I know that true power doesn't need a VIP pass. True power is what you build when everyone else has left you behind. The crowd erupted again, cheering, stomping their feet. I didn't smile. I just held my gaze on my family. They weren't cheering. They were frozen statues of humiliation. My mother was shaking her head, mouthing the word no over and over again, as if refusing to believe that her scapegoat daughter was now the most powerful person in the room. They thought it was a prank. They thought it was a mistake. But as I walked off the stage holding my diploma like a weapon, I knew the real lesson was just beginning. The bus ride was over, and I was about to drive over them. The air inside Le Jardin was thick enough to choke on, scented with truffle oil and the heavy perfume of old money. It was the kind of restaurant where the menus didn't have prices and the waiters looked down on you if your watch cost less than a car. My parents had practically dragged me here straight from the auditorium, their previous embarrassment miraculously cured by the announcement of my net worth. We were seated at the best table in the house, a round booth upholstered in velvet that felt like a trap. The waiter poured vintage Dom Perignon into crystal flutes, and my mother Patrice raised her glass with a smile so dazzling it looked painful. To Zoe she cooed, her voice dripping with a sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Our little genius. I always knew you had it in you. I remember telling your father just last week that your stubbornness would pay off eventually." I stared at her, my hand gripping the stem of my water glass. Just this morning she had called me a drab librarian who got lost. Now I was a genius. The rewriting of history had begun, and they were doing it with the confidence of seasoned con artists. My father Desmond leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. He looked around the room, making sure the other diners saw him celebrating. "You know, Zoe," he said, his voice booming with false modesty, "I was hard on you growing up. I made you take the bus. I refused to buy you the toys Chloe got. I pushed you to the brink. And look at the result." He gestured to me as if I were a prize heifer he had raised for the slaughter. "If I had coddled you like other parents, you would never have developed this hunger. You would be soft. I built that grit in you. This $1 billion. It is as much my achievement as it is yours. I provided the pressure that created the diamond." I almost choked on my sip of water. The audacity was breathtaking. They were twisting years of neglect and emotional abuse into a master plan of parenting. They were claiming credit for the scars they inflicted. I watched Chloe across the table. She was busy taking photos of her lobster thermidor, but she nodded in agreement. "Yeah, Zoe," she chimed in, not looking up from her screen. "You should really thank Dad. If he had bought you a car, you probably would have just partied instead of studying. We sacrificed a lot so you could be the smart one." I sat there letting them talk, letting them fill the silence with their delusions. I wanted to scream, but I knew that losing my temper would only give them ammunition. Instead, I cut into my steak with surgical precision, imagining it was the cord that still tethered me to these people. That was when Brad decided to make his move. He had been quiet for the first 20 minutes, clearly intimidated, but now the wine had given him courage. He loosened his tie and leaned in, resting his elbows on the table, invading my personal space. "So Zoe," he started, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. 1.2 billion. That is a lot of liquidity to have sitting around. I assume you have a wealth management team, but let's be honest. Those Wall Street guys are sharks. They will eat a girl like you alive. They see a woman coming, especially a woman of color, and they see fees, fees, fees. He paused, waiting for me to nod to look grateful for his protection. When I didn't, he continued flashing his salesman smile. Lucky for you, you have family. You know I have been working with Apex Capital on some very high-level derivatives. We are leveraging crypto-backed assets to short the housing market volatility. It is complicated stuff, very technical, but the returns are insane. We are talking 40% monthly. I can get you in on the founders round. If you transfer, say, $500 million to my management fund, I can double it in 6 months. I will handle the heavy lifting, you just sit back and do your science experiments. I looked at Brad. I looked at his cheap suit that he thought was expensive. I looked at the desperation in his eyes that he was trying to mask as confidence. He was spouting buzzwords he had probably learned from TikTok finance gurus. Derivatives. Crypto-backed. It was a word salad of fraud. I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin and placed it on the table. Brad. I said, my voice calm and even. I just sold a company based on a proprietary algorithm that predicts protein folding structures. I understand complex systems. Your pitch sounds like a Ponzi scheme wrapped in a pyramid scheme. And for the record, shorting housing volatility with crypto leverage isn't a strategy, it is financial suicide. The table went silent. Brad turned a deep shade of red. My father slammed his glass down, sloshing wine onto the tablecloth. Zoe, he barked. Apologize to Brad immediately. He is trying to help you. He is a businessman. You might be book smart, but you don't know how the real world works. You need a man to handle that kind of money. You are going to get scammed if you don't listen to us. I looked at my father, the man who had 3 mortgages on a house he couldn't afford, the man who was currently driving a car he didn't own. The gaslighting was complete. They were trying to convince me that I was the incompetent one, that I needed their protection, when in reality, they were the wolves waiting at the door. I checked my watch. The dinner had lasted exactly an hour. That was 59 minutes too long. I signaled the waiter. It was Antoine, a man I had known for years because I used to tutor his daughter in calculus for free when I was a struggling grad student. He hurried over, ignoring my father's frantic waving, and stood next to me. Yes, Dr. Washington, he asked, emphasizing the title my family refused to use. The check, please, I said. And Antoine, please split it. My mother laughed nervously. Oh, stop it, Zoe. You are the billionaire. It is tradition for the winner to treat the family. Don't be tacky. I looked my mother dead in the eye. You told me this morning that I needed to learn the value of money. You told me that handouts create weakness. I am just following your parenting advice, Mom. I am refusing to coddle you. I wouldn't want to rob you of the satisfaction of paying for your own lobster. Antoine placed the leather folder on the table. I opened it. The total was nearly $4,000. They had ordered the most expensive items on the menu: caviar, Wagyu, bottles of wine I hadn't touched. I pulled out a $20 bill and placed it on top of the check. That covers my side salad and my iced tea, I said. I stood up, smoothing out my graduation gown. My father looked at the bill and then at me, his eyes bulging. You can't be serious, he hissed. I don't have my wallet. I left it in the car. I smiled. No, you didn't, Dad. It is in your jacket pocket. But it doesn't matter. Because even if you try to use your card, it won't work. What did you do? He whispered, genuine fear finally creeping into his voice. I leaned down so only they could hear me. When I saw the notification that you had tried to charge a $3,000 suit to my name yesterday, I called the bank. I flagged all accounts associated with the Washington Family Trust as compromised due to identity theft. They froze everything, Dad. Your credit cards, your debit cards, even the joint account. Until the investigation is over, which could take weeks, you don't have access to a dime. Panic erupted at the table. Chloe started frantically checking her banking app. Mom grabbed Dad's arm. Desmond, do something! She can't do this! I turned to walk away. Enjoy dessert, I said over my shoulder. I hear the crème brûlée is to die for. But I would eat it quickly if I were you. I don't think Antoine likes it when people can't pay. I walked out of the restaurant, the sound of my father shouting my name fading behind me. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel heavy. I felt weightless. I pulled out my phone and saw a text from my lawyer. The acquisition of the mortgage on 4500 Peachtree Road is complete. You are now the legal owner of your parents' residence. I typed back a single word. Good. I walked toward the curb where my Uber was waiting. I didn't look back at the restaurant window. I didn't need to see them scrambling trying to figure out which one of them would have to wash dishes. I had a busy night ahead of me. I had a house to inspect and a brother-in-law to investigate. The dinner was over, but the feast had just begun, and I was the only one at the table with a knife. The darkness didn't fall gradually inside the guest house. It slammed shut. 1 second I was reviewing the acquisition documents for the bank that held my parents' mortgage, and the next the overhead light flickered and died. The hum of the refrigerator ceased. The air conditioning unit, which was already struggling to battle the Georgia humidity, gave a final death rattle and went silent. I sat in the pitch black of the converted storage shed my parents graciously called an apartment. I didn't need to check the fuse box. I knew exactly what had happened. This was the penalty for the restaurant bill. This was Desmond and Patrice Washington exerting the only control they thought they had left. They couldn't touch my bank account. They couldn't shame me publicly anymore without looking foolish, so they resorted to petty domestic terrorism. They cut the power. I walked over to the window and pulled back the thin, dusty curtain. Across the lawn, the main house was blazing with light. The crystal chandelier in the foyer was on. The landscape lighting was illuminating the manicured hedges. They were probably sitting in the climate-controlled living room, sipping wine, laughing about how they were teaching me a lesson in respect. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen glowed, illuminating the peeling paint on the walls. I could have called the power company. I could have called the police to report an illegal eviction tactic. I could have simply walked into the main house and announced that as the new owner of the mortgage, I was technically their landlord. But I didn't. I needed them to feel powerful for just a little longer. I needed them to overplay their hand. I turned on the flashlight mode and set the phone on the wobbly table. The shadows stretched long and distorted across the room, turning piles of old boxes into looming ghosts. The heat was already rising, the thick, wet air of Atlanta seeping through the cracks in the floorboards. I sat down and waited. I wasn't waiting for the lights to come back on. I was waiting for the truth to arrive. 20 minutes later, a car pulled up not in the main driveway but on the service road that ran behind the property. I watched as a figure stepped out dressed in dark clothing, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who spent a lot of time avoiding attention. I opened the back door of the guest house. Marcus didn't look like a private investigator from the movies. He looked like an accountant, which was exactly why he was the best in the city. He stepped into the stifling heat of the room and wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Nice place," he said dryly, looking around at the grim conditions. "I didn't know billionaires lived like squatters." I gestured to the only chair that wasn't covered in my old textbooks. "It keeps me grounded," I said. "What do you have for me, Marcus?" He opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He handed it to me. The weight of it felt substantial. This was not a thin file. This was a catalog of disasters. I angled my phone light so I could read the documents. The first page was a photocopy of a driver's license, Bradley Remington. Except the address wasn't the Remington estate in the Hamptons. It was a P.O. box in a strip mall in New Jersey. "He is a Remington," Marcus began, his voice low and professional. "But he is the black sheep. The family disowned him 6 years ago, legally. They paid him a lump sum of $50,000 to remove himself from the family trust and never use the name for business dealings again. He blew through that money in 3 months in Vegas." I flipped the page. Bank statements, red ink everywhere, overdraft fees, bounced checks, loan rejections. "He is broke," I whispered. Not just cash poor. He is drowning. It gets worse, Marcus said. Look at page 4. I turned the page. It was a police report from Chicago. Fraud. Embezzlement. The charges were dropped, but the narrative was clear. He had been engaged to a woman named Keisha. Her father owned a chain of beauty supply stores. Brad had convinced her to let him manage the expansion. He drained the accounts and disappeared 2 weeks before the wedding. He has a type, Marcus noted, pointing to a photo of another woman on the next page. A doctor in D.C. Same story. He targets successful black families. He plays on the desire for proximity to white institutional wealth. He knows your parents want that prestige, that connection to the old money world. He is selling them a fantasy, Zoe, and in exchange, he gets access to their credit lines. I looked at the debts listed on the final page. It was a terrifying number. $700,000 owed to private lenders, not banks, sharks. The kind of people who didn't send letters when you missed a payment. The kind of people who broke legs. That is why he is rushing the wedding. I realized the pieces clicking into place. He needs the dowry. He needs my father to liquidate assets to pay off these loan sharks before they find him. He isn't in love with Chloe. He is using her as a human shield. Marcus nodded. He is desperate, Zoe. Desperate men are dangerous. He has been taking calls from burner phones. I tracked the signal. The people calling him are from Atlantic City. They gave him a deadline. He has until the end of the month to pay up. That is 2 days after the wedding. I closed the file. The anger I felt wasn't hot like fire. It was cold like ice. My parents were foolish, yes. They were cruel to me, yes. But they were walking off a cliff. They were about to hand their favorite daughter, their golden child, over to a predator who would destroy her life to save his own skin. And they were financing the destruction with money they didn't even have. Thank you, Marcus, I said. Keep watching him. I need to know every move he makes, especially if he tries to leave town. Marcus stood up. You should be careful, Zoe. If he knows you are onto him, he might lash out. He has nothing left to lose. I watched Marcus disappear back into the night. I sat alone in the dark for a long time, the heavy file resting on my lap. The heat was suffocating now. My shirt was sticking to my back. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let Chloe marry him, not without trying to warn her. She hated me. She mocked me. But she was my sister, and she was about to become a victim of the same system that made our parents value appearance over substance. I picked up the file and walked out of the guest house. The night air was loud with crickets. I crossed the lawn, the grass wet with dew against my ankles. I didn't go to the front door. I went around to the side to the French doors that led to the patio. I could see them inside. Brad had gone. Mom and Dad had gone up to bed. Chloe was sitting on the sofa alone, scrolling through her phone, the blue light illuminating her perfect makeup. I tapped on the glass. She jumped, dropping her phone. She looked over, squinting into the darkness. When she saw it was me, she rolled her eyes and motioned for me to go away. I tapped again, harder. She huffed, stood up and unlocked the door, sliding it open, just a crack. What do you want, Zoe? She snapped. The power is out, because Dad said you needed to learn appreciation. Don't come here begging for a charger. It is pathetic. I slid the door open further and stepped inside. The blast of air conditioning felt like heaven, but I didn't let it show. I am not here for electricity, Chloe. I held up the file. I am here to save your life. Chloe laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. Save my life. Please. You are just jealous. You have been jealous since we were kids, because I am the pretty one and you are the smart one. She said the word smart like it was a slur. You can't stand that Brad chose me. You can't stand that I am marrying a Remington. He is not a Remington, Chloe, I said, tossing the file onto the coffee table. Not anymore. He was disowned. He is broke. He owes nearly $1 million to loan sharks. He scammed 2 other women just like you in the last 3 years. He is not marrying you for love. He is marrying you because he needs Dad's money to stop people from breaking his kneecaps. Chloe didn't even look at the file. She stared at me with pure venom. You went and hired a detective. You are sick, Zoe. You are actually obsessed with him. You want him so bad you are making up stories. Read the file, Chloe. Look at the police reports. Look at the bank statements. I don't need to read your garbage, she screamed. Her voice echoed in the high ceilings of the foyer. Brad told me about his past. He told me he had a rebellious phase. He told me his family cut him off because he wanted to make his own way, just like Dad did. He was honest with me. He lied to you, I countered, stepping closer. He didn't leave to make his own way. He stole from them. Chloe, please, just look at the evidence. If you marry him, you are legally tying yourself to his debt. He will ruin you. He will ruin this family. Chloe shoved me. It was a hard physical shove that sent me stumbling back onto the patio. Get out! She shrieked. You are just trying to ruin my happiness because you are miserable. You have $1 billion, and you are still just the dark shadow in the corner. No amount of money is going to make a man look at you the way Brad looks at me. You can buy the bank, Zoe, but you can't buy being chosen. The words hit me harder than the shove. You can't buy being chosen. It was the core wound of my entire life, the belief that I was unlovable because I didn't fit their aesthetic. I looked at my sister. I saw the fear behind her rage. She knew. Somewhere deep down she knew something was off. The fake bag, the rush to marry, the vague answers about his business, but she was too invested in the fantasy to turn back now. She would rather drive off a cliff in a Bentley than walk to safety. Fine, I said quietly. I picked up the file from the table where I had thrown it. I tried Chloe. Remember that. When the repo men come, when the police come, remember that I stood here and gave you a chance to walk away. I'm going to tell Dad you broke in, she hissed, sliding the glass door shut. Go back to your shed, Zoe. You look better in the dark. She locked the door and turned her back on me, marching back to the sofa to pick up her phone. I stood on the patio for a moment, listening to the hum of the air conditioner that I was paying for cooling the house that I owned, protecting the sister who despised me. I walked back across the lawn to the guest house. The darkness inside didn't bother me anymore. In fact, it felt clarifying. I had done my duty. I had offered the olive branch. Now I could proceed with a clear conscience. If they wanted to play the villains, I would let them. But they had forgotten one thing about villains. They always underestimate the hero until the final act. I sat down on my cot and turned on my phone flashlight again. I called Marcus. She didn't take the bait, I said. I figured she wouldn't. Marcus replied. What is the next move? Let him run, I said. Let him think he has won. Let him get all the way to the altar. And Marcus, yes. Find out who holds the note on those gambling debts in Atlantic City. I want to buy that debt too. There was a pause on the line. You want to become his loan shark? Marcus asked, his voice tinged with surprise. No, I said, lying back on the hard mattress. I want to become his owner. If he wants to marry into the Washington family so badly, I am going to make sure he gets exactly what he bargained for. He wants a connection to my money. I will give it to him. I will be the one holding the leash. I hung up the phone. The heat was oppressive, but I shivered. The game had changed. It wasn't just about saving my assets anymore. It was about total, absolute domination. I closed my eyes, visualizing the wedding day. It was going to be spectacular. I would make sure of it. The next morning, the sun beat down on the slate roof of the main house, but inside the guest cottage the air was cool and the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. I sat at my makeshift desk, watching the surveillance feed on my laptop. The camera I had hidden in the library was high definition, capturing every bead of sweat on Brad's forehead as he paced back and forth. He was holding his phone with a white-knuckled grip, his voice a harsh whisper that barely registered on the microphone. Please, he hissed into the receiver. I just need 48 hours. The money is coming. It is a liquidity issue, not a solvency issue. I could see him flinch as the person on the other end shouted something back. Brad squeezed his eyes shut. I know what the consequences are, he said, his voice trembling. I value my fingers. Just don't send anyone to the house. The wedding is in 3 days. After that, I will have the full amount plus interest. He hung up the phone and leaned against the mahogany bookshelf, looking like a man who was watching his own execution. He checked his watch. He had run out of time. The loan sharks from Atlantic City were not interested in his excuses. They wanted their principal, and they wanted it now. I watched as he composed himself, smoothing his hair and adjusting his tie. He was about to give the performance of his life. He walked out of the library and headed toward the kitchen where my father was brooding over his morning coffee and the frozen credit card statements. I switched the camera feed to the kitchen. Desmond looked haggard. The stress of the last 24 hours was etching new lines into his face. The frozen accounts meant he couldn't pay the caterers for the wedding. He couldn't pay the florist. The illusion of wealth he had spent decades curating was crumbling, and he was terrified. Brad entered the room radiating a frantic energy that he tried to disguise as excitement. Desmond, we have a problem, but I have found a solution, Brad said, pulling out a chair and sitting down. The liquidity crunch is hitting my hedge fund harder than expected because of the market correction in Asia. My assets are tied up in escrow for another week. My father groaned, rubbing his temples. A week, Brad, the wedding is Saturday. If we don't pay the venue by tomorrow, they are going to cancel. Do you know how humiliating that would be? The senator is coming. The mayor is coming. We cannot cancel. I know, Brad said quickly, leaning forward. That is why we need a bridge loan. I have a contact at a private equity firm. They are looking to acquire historic properties in the district for a preservation project. They are offering a premium, Desmond. A massive premium. My father looked up, suspicious but desperate. What property? We don't have any liquid assets. The bank froze everything because of Zoe, the legacy house. Brad said softly. The brownstone on Auburn Avenue. Desmond slammed his hand on the table. Absolutely not. That house has been in the Washington family for 4 generations. My grandfather bought it with the money he made from his first patent. It is the cornerstone of our history. I promised my mother I would never sell it. I watched on the screen, sipping my coffee. The legacy house was the only thing of real value they had left. It was a beautiful, crumbling structure in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. It was worth millions, but my father had let it sit empty for years, refusing to renovate it, but refusing to sell it, treating it like a trophy. Desmond, listen to me, Brad pleaded, his voice cracking. I am not saying we lose it forever. We sell it now to clear the cash for the wedding and to pay off the short-term debts. Once my trust fund unlocks next month, I will buy it back. I promise. I will buy it back for double the price if I have to. But right now, we need the cash flow. Unless you want to call the senator and tell him the wedding is off because you are broke, unless you want Zoe to win. That was the trigger. The mention of my name. Brad knew exactly where to press. My father's jaw tightened. He hated the idea of me seeing him fail more than he loved his ancestors. How much? Desmond asked quietly. 3.5 million, Brad lied. He didn't know the actual offer yet, but he was guessing. Cash deal. Closing in 24 hours. Desmond stared into his coffee cup. 3.5 million would solve everything. It would pay for the wedding. It would pay off the credit cards. It would leave enough over to buy a new car to replace the Bentley if they couldn't recover it. He looked at Brad. You swear you will buy it back? On my life, Brad said. And in that moment, he effectively signed his own death warrant. I closed the laptop. It was time to make a phone call. I dialed the number for Sterling and Associates, the high-end law firm that handled my corporate acquisitions. A sleek, sharp voice answered on the first ring. Ms. Washington, good morning. Good morning, Arthur, I said. It is time to execute Operation Phoenix. My father is ready to sell the Auburn Avenue property. I want you to approach him as the representative of Phoenix Holdings. Offer him $4 million. $4 million, Arthur asked. That is significantly above market value. I know, I said. I want him to be blinded by the number. I want him to think he has won the lottery. But Arthur, the contract needs to be specific. I am listening. I want a strict possession clause. The closing will happen tomorrow and the funds will be transferred immediately. However, the contract must state that the property must be completely vacated and all keys turned over by midnight on Sunday. That is the day after the wedding. Standard procedure, Arthur said. No, I interrupted. Add a liquidated damages clause. If they fail to vacate by the deadline, or if there is any lien or encumbrance discovered on the title after signing, specifically if the funds from the sale are used for illegal activities like paying off unregistered loans, the penalty is triple the purchase price and the seller forfeits all remaining equity in their primary residence as collateral. Arthur paused. That is a draconian clause, Ms. Washington. No competent lawyer would let his client sign that. My father won't hire a competent lawyer, I said. He is trying to save face. He will use the family attorney who is 80 years old and half blind. He will see the $4 million and he will sign anything. Just make the pages thick and the font small. Consider it done, Arthur said. I hung up. The trap was set. The $4 million would go into my father's account. He would immediately give it to Brad. Brad would pay off the loan sharks. But the kicker was the collateral. My father had already leveraged the primary residence. By pledging it again as collateral for this penalty clause, he was committing fraud. And when I revealed that Phoenix Holdings was me, and that I was calling in the penalty, I would own everything. The past, the present, and the future. 2 hours later, a black sedan pulled up to the main house. Arthur Sterling stepped out looking every inch the shark that he was. He carried a leather portfolio containing the documents that would end the Washington legacy. I watched from the guest house window as my father greeted him at the door, shaking his hand with a relief that was palpable even from this distance. I switched back to the hidden camera in the dining room. My mother had brought out the crystal champagne flutes. Chloe was there, looking at photos of mansions on her tablet, already spending the money they hadn't received yet. This is a blessing, my mother said, pouring champagne. I never liked that old house anyway. It smells like mildew. With $4 million, we can finally redecorate this place properly. And Brad, you can get that investment property in the Caymans you were talking about. Brad was sweating profusely, chugging his champagne. Yeah, Patrice. The Caymans. Sounds great. Arthur laid the contract on the dining table. It was thick, bound in heavy cream paper. He flipped to the signature page, bypassing the 20 pages of dense legal jargon that contained the poison pill. As we discussed, Mr. Washington, Arthur said smoothly, Phoenix Holdings is eager to close. The wire transfer is set up for immediate release upon your signature. $4 million. We just need you to initial here and sign here. My father put on his reading glasses. He looked at the number at the top of the page. $4 million. He smiled. He didn't read the clause about the vacation date. He didn't read the clause about the collateral. He was too busy counting the zeros. You know, my father said, picking up his Montblanc pen. Zoe thinks she is the only one who can make big moves. She thinks she is the tycoon. But look at this. $4 million for a rotting building. That is business acumen. He is right, Daddy, Chloe chirped. Zoe is just a nerd who got lucky. You are the real deal. Brad was bouncing his leg under the table. Sign it, Desmond, he urged, his voice tight. Let's get this done so we can celebrate. Desmond lowered the pen. The tip scratched against the paper, a sound that was amplified by the microphone. He signed his name with a flourish. Desmond T. Washington. He pressed the family seal into the red wax that Arthur had prepared, a dramatic, archaic touch that appealed to my father's vanity. There, Desmond said, sitting back. Done. Arthur checked the signature. He pulled out a notary stamp and slammed it down on the paper. The sound echoed like a gavel striking a block. Congratulations, Mr. Washington, Arthur said, closing the folder. The funds will be in your account within the hour. The room erupted in cheers. My mother hugged my father. Chloe squealed and hugged Brad. Brad looked like he was about to faint from relief. He had the money. He could pay off the mob. He thought he was safe. I watched them toast their success. I watched them drink the champagne that I had paid for in the house that I owned, celebrating the sale of a property that I had just bought. I reached for the bottle of vintage Bordeaux I had been saving. I poured a glass, the deep red liquid swirling in the light. Enjoy the moment, I whispered to the screen, because the clock has just started ticking. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted like iron and earth. It tasted like victory. The contract was signed. The trap was sprung. Now all I had to do was wait for the wedding. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Marcus. The Eagle has landed. The money is moving to Desmond. Track it. As soon as Desmond transfers it to Brad and Brad transfers it to the account in Atlantic City, I want you to buy that debt. Marcus replied instantly. Buying the debt from the mob. That is risky, Zoe, I typed back. I am not asking them to negotiate. I am paying them a premium to transfer the promissory note to me. They get their money, they walk away. And I get the legal right to break Brad's legs. Metaphorically speaking, of course. I set the phone down. The stage was set for the wedding. It wasn't going to be a celebration of love. It was going to be a red wedding of financial ruin. And I had the front row seat. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the Washington estate, shadows that looked suspiciously like prison bars. The Golden Gala was the kind of event where the air conditioning was set to 65 degrees, just so the women could wear their $5,000 furs in the middle of a humid Atlanta June. It was a sea of black ties, diamond chokers, and the flashing lights of the paparazzi that strobed like lightning storms against the red carpet. I arrived 20 minutes late by design. My stylist had put me in a custom gown made of liquid gold silk that clung to my frame like a second skin, a deliberate visual statement that I was no longer the girl in the shadows. As my Bentley pulled up to the valet stand, my Bentley, not the one my father was currently pretending to own, I saw a commotion at the entrance. My family was huddled near the velvet rope, a tableau of desperate exclusion. My father Desmond was gesturing wildly at the poor young woman holding the clipboard. My mother was fanning herself aggressively, her face a mask of pinched fury, while Chloe stood slightly behind them, frantically texting, likely trying to find a backdoor connection. Brad was pacing, looking like a man whose time was running out, which of course it was. I stepped out of the car and the cameras turned toward me instantly. The flashbulbs were blinding, a rhythmic popping sound that usually made me anxious, but tonight it felt like armor. I walked up the carpet, ignoring the shouted questions from reporters, and approached the bottleneck at the door. Do you know who I am? My father was shouting, his voice cracking with indignation. I am Desmond Washington. I am a pillar of this community. My daughter is Zoe Washington, the billionaire. She is the chair of this event. The woman with the clipboard looked unimpressed. I understand that, sir, but your name is not on the list. The guest list is strict, no exceptions, but we are her family. My mother shrieked, stepping forward. She would never exclude us. This is a mistake. Check it again. The woman sighed, clearly exhausted. I have checked it 3 times, ma'am. You are not on the list. Please step aside so other guests can enter. I glided up behind them, savoring the moment. Is there a problem? I asked, my voice cutting through the noise. My parents spun around. Relief washed over my father's face, quickly replaced by anger. Zoe expecting us to wait out here like commoners. Tell this girl who we are. Get us inside. I looked at the clipboard girl who was looking at me with wide eyes. It is okay, Jessica, I said smoothly. They are with me. I suppose there was a clerical error. You can let them in. See? My father sneered at the girl, straightening his jacket. Incompetence. Sheer incompetence. I leaned in close to my father as we passed the checkpoint. I didn't forget to put you on the list, Dad. I left you off on purpose. But since you are here, try not to embarrass me. The people inside actually have money. They can smell desperation. Desmond scoffed, brushing past me. Watch and learn, Zoe. This is where I shine. We entered the ballroom. It was a cavernous space draped in crystals and white orchids. A jazz band was playing softly on a raised stage. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne that cost more per glass than my first car. My family immediately dispersed like predators sensing prey. Chloe dragged Brad toward the bar to get a drink and, more importantly, to be seen. My parents headed straight for the cluster of power players near the stage. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water and positioned myself near a marble pillar where I had a clear view of the room. This was my arena now. I had spent the last week making phone calls quietly poisoning the well. I had whispered to the banking executives that the Washington family was under investigation for fraud. I had mentioned to the real estate moguls that Desmond was leveraging assets he didn't own. In this world, rumor was more damaging than a lawsuit. I watched Brad. He had downed 2 drinks in rapid succession and was now cornering Reginald Vance, the CEO of the largest venture capital firm in the Southeast. Vance was a man I respected, a shark who could smell blood in the water from miles away. I saw Brad leaning in, doing his salesman routine, probably pitching the same fake hedge fund he had tried to sell me. He was gesturing expansively, his movements jerky and unrefined. I moved slightly closer, just within earshot. "And the returns are guaranteed," Mr. Vance Brad was saying, his voice too loud. "We are closing the founders round this week. I could squeeze you in for a $5 million buy-in. It is a favor, really." Vance looked at Brad with an expression of pure boredom. He took a sip of his bourbon and set the glass down on a passing waiter's tray. "Young man," Vance said, his voice deep and carrying easily over the jazz music, "I had lunch with Zoe Washington yesterday. She mentioned you might approach me." Brad froze. His smile faltered. "Oh, did she?" "Zoe tends to exaggerate. She doesn't understand high finance." Vance chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "She understands enough to warn me that your liquidity is non-existent. She tells me you are shopping around a bridge loan to pay off gambling debts in Atlantic City." Brad turned pale. "That is a lie." "She is lying. I am a Remington." Vance looked Brad up and down, his eyes lingering on the lapel of Brad's tuxedo. "You know, son," Vance said, leaning in so the surrounding circle of people could hear, "a Remington would never wear a tuxedo with a rental tag still stapled to the cuff." He pointed to the plastic tag sticking out of Brad's sleeve. A ripple of laughter went through the group. Brad looked down, horrified, frantically trying to tuck the tag back in. His face turned a deep, blotchy red. "Excuse me," Vance said, turning his back on him. "I have to go speak to someone who actually owns the suit they are wearing." Brad stood there, stripped naked in front of the elite. He looked around wildly and caught my eye. I raised my glass to him in a silent toast. He grabbed Chloe's arm, who was busy taking a selfie, and dragged her away toward the shadows, his humiliation radiating off him like heat. But my father hadn't seen this. He was on the other side of the room, trying to get the attention of the mayor. I saw the mayor nod politely, and then excuse himself, walking briskly away. My father tried to follow, but he was intercepted by another guest, who turned his back on him. It was happening everywhere. Doors were closing, smiles were fading. The isolation was absolute. Desmond scanned the room looking for a lifeline. He saw me standing with the chairman of the board, laughing at a joke. He saw the respect in the chairman's eyes. He saw the way people gravitated toward me, and something inside him snapped. The envy that had been simmering for years, the resentment that his scapegoat child had surpassed him, boiled over. He marched across the ballroom. I saw him coming. His walk was aggressive, his fists clenched. I excused myself from the chairman and turned to face him. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice low. "You are making a scene." "You ungrateful little witch," he hissed, grabbing my arm. His grip was painful, his fingers digging into my bicep. "I saw you talking to Vance. I saw you talking to the mayor. You are telling them lies about me, aren't you? That is why they won't give me the time of day." I pulled my arm away, smoothing the silk of my dress. "I didn't have to tell them lies, Dad. I told them the truth. I told them you are insolvent. I told them you are selling the family legacy to pay for a scam artist's wedding. They don't want to do business with a drowning man." Desmond's face turned purple. "I am Desmond Washington. I made you. Everything you have is because of me. You should be introducing me to these people. You should be using your influence to help the family, not destroy it." I looked at him with cold detachment. I offered to help the family, I said. I offered to pay off the house if you got rid of Brad. You chose him. You chose the counterfeit over the real thing. Now live with it. You think you are so special because you have money, he shouted. People turned to look. The jazz band faltered. The room went quiet. You are nothing. You are still just the ugly duckling who got lucky. I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice to a lethal whisper. And you are a fraud, Dad. And everyone in this room knows it. That was it. The truth pierced his ego in a way no insult ever could. His hand came up before I could react. Smack! The sound was like a gunshot in the silent ballroom. My head snapped to the side. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. The sting was immediate, hot, and sharp across my cheekbone. I stood there for a second looking at the floor, tasting the metallic tang of blood where my tooth had cut my lip. I slowly turned my head back to face him. My father was staring at his own hand, trembling. He looked around and realized what he had done. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on us, and more importantly, dozens of phone cameras were raised, red recording lights glowing like demonic eyes. The professional photographers near the stage were snapping away furiously, capturing the image of the prominent minister slapping the city's newest billionaire. My mother rushed over, grabbing his arm. Desmond. Oh my God, I touched my cheek. It was throbbing. I looked at my father and I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I smiled. It was a terrifying, ice-cold smile. Thank you, I said, my voice projecting clearly in the silence. You just gave me the final piece of evidence I needed, security. I called out, not shouting but commanding. 3 large men in black suits materialized instantly. They had been waiting for my signal. Please remove this man from the premises, I said, pointing at my father. He has just assaulted a guest. And I want to press charges. Zoe. No, my mother screamed. He is your father. He is a liability, I corrected. Get them out. All of them. The security guards grabbed Desmond by the arms. He didn't fight. He was in shock. They dragged him toward the exit, my mother and a weeping Chloe trailing behind him, Brad hiding his face from the cameras. I stood alone in the center of the ballroom. My cheek was swelling. A waiter rushed over with a napkin and a bucket of ice. Ms. Washington, are you all right? Do you need a medic? I took the ice and pressed it to my face. I looked at the crowd who were still staring in horror. I straightened my spine. I am fine, I announced. Please, everyone. The music stopped. Let's not let one man's lack of control ruin a night of charity. Play on. The band started up again, hesitant at first, then finding the rhythm. I turned and walked toward the bathroom to check the damage. In the mirror, the red handprint was stark against my skin. It would bruise. It would be ugly. But as I looked at my reflection, I knew the trade was worth it. That slap had just destroyed his reputation. It had alienated him from society, and it had given me the moral high ground to bury him completely. I pulled out my phone. The video was already trending on Twitter. #billionaireslap. The comments were vicious. He was finished. I applied a layer of powder over the redness, reapplied my lipstick, and walked back out to the party. The war wasn't over. But the enemy had just nuked himself, and I was the only one left standing in the fallout. The morning after the Golden Gala, the world did not wake up to news of a charity fundraiser. It woke up to a 10-second video clip that was looping endlessly on every major news network, social media timeline, and group chat in America. The #billionaireslap was trending #1 globally, surpassing even the latest celebrity divorce. I sat in my office at the Ethereos headquarters, watching the footage on a 60-inch monitor. The angle was perfect. You could see the vein bulging in my father's forehead. You could see the terrified recoil of the guests. And most importantly, you could see the stoic, iron-jawed resilience of his daughter, the victim standing tall while he unraveled. My publicist walked in looking like she had won the lottery. "Zoe," she said, placing a tablet on my desk. Market open was 5 minutes ago. Ethereum stock is up 12%. The public sentiment analysis is off the charts. You are polling at 98% favorability. They are calling you the symbol of breaking generational trauma. Women's shelters are reporting record donations in your name. You didn't just survive that slap, you monetized it. I looked at the screen. The comments were a river of support. Team Zoe was everywhere. People were dissecting my father's outfit, his angry expression, his history. The internet sleuths had already dug up his old sermons where he preached about family values and temperance, juxtaposing them with the video of him assaulting me. The hypocrisy was delicious and the internet was eating it up. But the real damage was happening offline. My assistant patched through a call from the Bishop of the Greater Atlanta Diocese. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message later. It was a polite but firm notification that Reverend Desmond Washington was suspended indefinitely from his duties pending an investigation into his conduct. The country club had already emailed a notice of membership revocation. The dominoes were not just falling, they were being incinerated. While I was watching my net worth climb by another $50 million due to the stock surge, my family was waking up to a different reality. The fallout had begun. I picked up my secure phone and dialed the number for the family office manager, a woman named Sarah, who had been secretly on my payroll for the last 6 months while pretending to work for my father. "Sarah," I said, "it is time for Phase 2. "I understand, Ms. Washington," she replied. "The utility disconnects. Everything I commanded. For years I have been the silent guarantor on the bills. I paid the electricity when Desmond forgot. I covered the water bill when Patrice spent the household budget on shoes. I paid for the fiber optic internet that Chloe uses to upload her vanity projects. They think these things are free rights given to them by God. Today they learn that services require solvency. Cut the power, cut the water, cut the gas. And Sarah killed the cell service family plan too. Consider it done," she said. I hung up and leaned back in my chair. The air conditioning in my office was cool and crisp. I took a sip of iced coffee. I imagined the temperature inside the Washington estate. It was mid-June in Atlanta. The forecast was 95 degrees with 80% humidity. A brick house without air conditioning essentially becomes a pizza oven within 3 hours. By noon, the text messages started arriving. Not to me, of course, since I had blocked them, but to my assistant. Desperate pleas from my mother asking why the lights were off. Furious demands from my father claiming there was a mistake with the power company. They still didn't get it. They thought it was an outage. They didn't realize it was a siege. I decided to check the hidden cameras one last time before the internet cut out at the house. The scene in the kitchen was chaotic. The refrigerator door was open. My mother was staring at the dark interior, realizing that the hundreds of dollars of organic produce and expensive cheeses were starting to warm up. "Why isn't the generator kicking on?" she screeched, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. "Desmond, go check the generator. I sold the generator last month," Desmond shouted back, slamming his fist on the counter. "I needed the cash to pay the deposit on the Bentley. I thought we would have the house money by now." "You sold the generator?" Patrice looked like she was about to faint. "Desmond, it is 90 degrees in here. My serums, my face creams effectively spoil if they get too hot." "Priorities, mother," I whispered to the screen. Suddenly, the screen went black. Connection lost. The internet had been cut. The window into their misery was closed, but my imagination filled in the blanks vividly. Without internet, Chloe was effectively lobotomized. She couldn't check Instagram. She couldn't see the comments defending her or attacking her. She couldn't distract herself. She was trapped in a hothouse with her parents and her fiancé, with no filter to blur the reality. Inside the mansion, the situation was deteriorating faster than I had anticipated. The heat was rising. The heavy velvet drapes that my mother loved so much were now trapping the heat inside, turning the living room into a sauna. Chloe was sitting on the floor near the window, holding her phone up, trying to get a single bar of signal. "This is impossible," she wailed, throwing her phone onto the sofa. I can't even load TikTok. How am I supposed to tell people that we are victims here? Dad, fix the Wi-Fi. I can't fix the Wi-Fi if the power is out. Chloe. Desmond snapped, loosening his tie. His shirt was already stained with sweat. And stop whining. I am trying to call the power company, but the call keeps dropping. It wasn't dropping. I had blacklisted their numbers with the service providers. They were shouting into a void. Brad walked into the room. He had taken off his suit jacket, but he was still wearing the dress shirt, which was now transparent with perspiration. The charm was gone. The facade of the wealthy heir was melting away along with the ice in the freezer. He looked agitated, his eyes darting around the room. "We need to go to a hotel," Brad said, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "I can't stay here. It is unsanitary. The toilets won't flush because the water pump is electric." "Great idea, Brad," my mother said, perking up. "Let's go to the Four Seasons. We can stay there until this blows over." "Desmond, give me the credit card." Desmond laughed a dry, hysterical sound. "The credit cards are frozen, Patrice. Remember, your daughter froze them. We have no access to funds until the investigation is over." Brad's face twisted into a snarl. "Well, you have cash, don't you? You are a minister. You always have cash stashed in the safe." Desmond looked away. "I used the cash reserve to pay the caterer for the wedding yesterday morning, before everything went to hell. So we are trapped here." Brad stepped closer to my father, his hands balling into fists. "We are trapped in this oven with no food and no water because you are too incompetent to pay a light bill." "Excuse me," Desmond bristled, trying to regain his authority. "I am the victim here. Zoe is doing this to me. And watch your tone, son. I am still the head of this house. You are the head of nothing," Brad shouted, and the mask finally fell completely. "You are a broke old man who let his daughter outsmart him. I need to make calls. I have business to handle. If I don't answer my phone, deals fall through." "Business." Chloe stood up, sweat trickling down her neck. "What business, Brad? You said you were retired. You said you managed your own wealth. Why are you so stressed about a phone call?" "Shut up!" "Chloe?" Brad turned on her, his eyes wild. "You don't know what you are talking about. You just sit there and take selfies while the ship sinks. You are useless." The silence that followed was heavy. My mother gasped. Chloe looked at Brad as if she had never seen him before. The sweet, doting fiancé who bought her Hermes bags was gone. In his place was a sweaty, desperate man who looked ready to hit someone. "Brad, you do not speak to my daughter that way," Patrice said, stepping forward, her voice trembling. "Oh, save it, Patrice," Brad spat. "Look at you. You are a mess. Your makeup is melting. You look like a clown." Patrice recoiled, clutching her chest. Desmond stepped in between them. "Get out," he warned. "If you are going to insult my wife, get out of my house." And go where Brad laughed bitterly. "I am marrying into this family on Saturday, remember? We are in this together, Pops, whether you like it or not. I am not leaving until I get what I was promised." "What were you promised?" Chloe asked, her voice small. "Security," Brad yelled, kicking a heavy ottoman over. It crashed onto the floor. "I was promised a legacy. I was promised a Bentley and a brownstone. And right now, all I have is heatstroke and a fiancé who asks too many questions." He stormed out of the room, heading toward the liquor cabinet in the study. He didn't care that the ice was melted. He needed a drink. Left alone in the sweltering living room, the Washington family stood in the wreckage of their dignity. The heat was oppressive, heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies and fear. Chloe sank back down to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. She looked at her parents. Her father was staring at the wall, defeated. Her mother was quietly sobbing, trying to wipe the mascara from her cheeks without a mirror. "I am hungry," Chloe whispered. "There is nothing to eat," Patrice sobbed. "The stove is electric, the microwave is electric, and the food in the fridge is going bad." "We have crackers," Desmond mumbled. In the pantry. Crackers, Chloe repeated. The heiress to the Washington legacy, eating crackers in the dark. Meanwhile, in my office, I was finalizing the paperwork for the next phase. The sun was setting over Atlanta, painting the sky in brilliant hues of purple and orange. I looked at the city skyline, feeling a profound sense of calm. They were breaking. The heat, the hunger, the isolation. It was stripping away their defenses layer by layer. By the time Saturday arrived, they wouldn't be walking down the aisle with pride. They would be crawling. I packed up my briefcase. I had a dinner reservation at the same restaurant where my father had slapped me, but this time I was hosting the board of directors. I would order the lobster, I would order the champagne, and I would toast to the power of consequences. As I walked to the elevator, I checked the weather forecast for tomorrow. 98 degrees. I smiled. Let them bake. The heat was just helping to set the clay of their new reality. The suffocating heat inside the main house had turned the silence into a heavy, oppressive blanket. It was 2 in the morning, and the air was stagnant, thick with the smell of expensive perfume turning sour on sweating skin. I was not there to witness the conspiracy firsthand, but the high-definition night vision cameras I had installed throughout the property captured every whisper, every shadow, and every act of betrayal with crystal clarity. My mother, Patrice, was sitting at the kitchen island, lit only by the harsh, ghostly glow of a flashlight she had propped up against a wilting vase of flowers. Chloe was pacing the floor, her silk pajamas clinging to her damp body, her face a mask of panic and exhaustion. They were hungry, they were hot, and for the first time in their lives they were truly desperate. "We cannot stay here another night," Patrice whispered, her voice rasping with thirst. "I feel like I am suffocating, and Brad is useless." He passed out in the study after drinking the last of the scotch. "We need cash, Chloe. We need to get a hotel room. We need food." Chloe stopped pacing and looked at her mother. "But we don't have cash, Mom. Dad spent everything. The accounts are frozen. We are destitute." Patrice's eyes narrowed, shifting toward the window that looked out over the dark lawn toward the guest house. "Not everyone is destitute," she murmured. "Your sister is sitting on $1 billion, and I happen to know she keeps a safe in the guest house closet. I saw her putting her jewelry away in there when she first moved back in. That diamond tennis necklace she wore to the gala. The sapphire earrings. They are sitting right there, Chloe, gathering dust while we starve." Chloe froze. "Mom, are you suggesting we rob Zoe? That is burglary. That is a felony." Patrice stood up, wiping sweat from her upper lip. "It is not burglary," she hissed, grabbing Chloe's arm. "It is family asset reallocation. Who paid for her education?" "We did." "Who put a roof over her head for 20 years?" "We did." "That money she has, those diamonds, they belong to this family. She owes us. We are just collecting what is due. Besides, she is at that board dinner. She won't be back for hours. We can get in, get the pieces, and get out. I know a man downtown who opens early. We can pawn them, get the cash check into the St. Regis, and figure out the rest later." I watched the screen as Chloe hesitated. I could see the war in her eyes between fear and entitlement, but then she looked at the empty refrigerator, felt the sweat running down her back, and the entitlement won. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's do it." The camera feed switched to the exterior view. The two figures moved across the lawn like clumsy ghosts. They were not stealthy. They were loud, stepping on dry twigs, their flashlights swinging wildly in the dark. They reached the back door of the guest house. I had expected this. I had anticipated that eventually, when the comfort was stripped away, they would turn on me not just with words but with claws. That was why I hadn't changed the keypad code on the back door. I wanted them to get in. I wanted them to cross the line from bad parents to criminals. Patrice punched in the code. The lock beeped and disengaged. They slipped inside. The interior cameras switched to night vision, bathing the room in a spectral green light. I watched as they crept into my bedroom. They didn't look for cash. They went straight for the vanity where I kept a decoy jewelry box. Inside, I had placed a few very real, very expensive items. A diamond choker worth $40,000. A Rolex date just. A pair of emerald studs. Valuable enough to solve their immediate problems, but not valuable enough to bankrupt me. Chloe grabbed the watch, her hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped it. "Mom, this is insane," she whispered, the audio picking up her rapid breathing. "What if she has cameras?" "Don't be stupid," Patrice snapped, scooping the necklace into her pocket. "Zoe is too cheap to pay for security systems. She lives in a shed, remember? She thinks she is saving money. Grab the earrings and let's go." I watched as my mother rummaged through my drawers, tossing my clothes onto the floor with a sneer of contempt. She wasn't just stealing. She was violating my space. She held up a silk scarf I had bought in Paris, looked at it with disgust, and threw it down. She found a stack of cash I had left in the top drawer, about $500 in 20s, and stuffed it into her bra. "This is justice," Patrice muttered to herself, her face distorted by the green tint of the camera. "She humiliates us in public, cuts off our power, tries to starve us. She deserves this. She deserves to lose everything." They cleaned out the box in under 3 minutes. They moved with the frantic, jerky energy of drug addicts looking for a fix, not the elegant matriarchs they pretended to be. Chloe knocked over a picture frame on her way out, a photo of me receiving my doctorate. She didn't stop to pick it up. She stepped right on my face, the glass cracking under her slipper with a sharp crunch. They exited the guest house, clutching their stolen treasure, and scurried back across the lawn to the main house. They thought they had pulled off the heist of the century. They thought they were clever. They had no idea that the red recording light on the camera hidden in the smoke detector had been blinking the entire time. I returned home an hour later. The Bentley glided silently up the driveway, the headlights sweeping over the dark, silent estate. I walked into the guest house. The air was cool thanks to the generator I had hidden around the back. I didn't need to turn on the lights to know what had happened. I saw the overturned picture frame on the floor. I saw the drawers pulled open, the clothes scattered like debris from a storm. I walked over to the vanity. The jewelry box was empty. I didn't call the police. Not yet. The police would arrest them, yes, but bail would be set, and the scandal would be messy. I needed something stronger than an arrest. I needed leverage that would bind them to me forever. I needed undeniable documented proof of their criminality that I could dangle over their heads like a guillotine blade. I sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. It was nearly 4 in the morning, but the man I needed to call was an insomniac who ran the most exclusive high-end pawn shop in Atlanta. He was a man who asked no questions unless the person asking the questions was his biggest investor. I dialed the number. Solomon picked up on the second ring. "Zoe, is everything all right?" "It is late. Everything is going exactly to plan." "Solomon," I said, my voice calm. "Listen carefully. Within the next few hours, as soon as you open your doors, 2 women are going to come into your shop. One is older, clutching her pearls. The other is young, looks like an Instagram model who has been crying. They are my mother and sister." Solomon was silent for a moment. "What are they bringing in? A diamond choker? A Rolex? Datejust and emerald studs," I listed. "They are going to tell you they are family heirlooms. They are going to seem desperate. They will take whatever cash offer you give them." "And what do you want me to do?" Solomon asked. "Do you want me to turn them away?" "Call the cops?" "No," I said. "I want you to buy them. Buy them, yes. Give them a fair price. Give them the cash. But Solomon, I want you to make sure every single piece of paperwork is filled out perfectly. I want their fingerprints on the intake forms. I want high-resolution scans of their IDs. I want them to sign the affidavit stating they are the legal owners of the items. And I want the security footage of the transaction saved and sent to my private server immediately." "I understand," Solomon said slowly. "You are building a case." "I am building a coffin," I corrected. Once they leave with the cash, put the items in your safe. Do not put them out for resale. I will come by this afternoon to buy them back from you for double what you paid them. You make a profit and I get the pawn tickets. You are a dangerous woman. Zoe. Solomon chuckled darkly. I learned from the best, I replied. Just make sure the paperwork is airtight. I want no wiggle room for them to claim it was a misunderstanding. I want proof of intent to sell stolen property across state lines if possible, but state charges will suffice. Consider it done, Solomon said. I will have the coffee ready for you when you come by. I hung up the phone. I looked at the shattered picture frame on the floor. I picked it up, brushing the broken glass off the photo of my smiling, hopeful younger self. I placed it back on the vanity. The theft was perfect. By taking the jewelry and exchanging it for cash, they had converted a family dispute into a transactional crime. They had crossed a legal threshold from which there was no return. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I could imagine the relief they were feeling right now. They probably thought they had won. They would get the cash, get a hotel room, order room service, and feel like they had outsmarted the system. But the cash was just bait. And the pawn ticket was the hook. I checked the time. The sun would be rising soon. The heat would return. But for me, the world felt very cold and very clear. I closed my eyes not to sleep, but to visualize the look on their faces when I revealed that the lifeline they had grabbed was actually a noose. The burglary was the final nail. They had stolen from the wrong daughter, and now I owned them. The sky over the coastal resort was the color of a fresh bruise, a swirling mix of purple and angry gray that promised violence. The wind was already whipping through the palm trees, bending them almost double, as if nature itself was trying to warn the Washington family to turn back. But inside the presidential suite of the St. Regis, the storm was already raging. My father Desmond sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, his head in his hands. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, a man hollowed out by days of heat, hunger, and humiliation. Standing over him was Brad, dressed in a wrinkled polo shirt, his eyes manic and bloodshot. He was pacing back and forth, vibrating with a frantic energy that filled the room like toxic gas. "We need the rest of the cash," Desmond Brad shouted, kicking the coffee table. "The caterers are threatening to walk. The florist is packing up the hydrangeas as we speak. Do you want to walk down the aisle in an empty room? Do you want the senator to arrive and see a bare altar? We need the deposit money. Now." Desmond looked up, his eyes pleading. "I gave you $3.5 million yesterday, Brad. That should have covered everything. The venue, the food, the debts. Where did it all go?" Brad didn't flinch. He had perfected his lies. "It went to the creditors, Desmond. It went to saving your reputation. I paid off the liens on the house so Zoe couldn't seize it. I paid off the credit card companies so they wouldn't sue you. That money is gone. It was used to stop the bleeding. But now we need operating capital for the actual event. I need the last $500,000. The reserve fund from the house sale." Desmond shook his head slowly. "That is all we have left," he whispered. "That $500,000 is the only thing standing between us and total ruin. If I give you that and something goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong," Brad screamed, grabbing Desmond by the shoulders and shaking him. "Listen to me, old man. If you don't give me that money, the wedding is off. I will walk. And you will be left here with a daughter in a wedding dress and no groom. You will be the laughingstock of Atlanta. Is that what you want? Do you want Zoe to win? Because if I leave, she wins. She will tell everyone you drove me away. She will tell everyone you are a failure." The mention of my name was the key, as it always was. My father stiffened. He could endure poverty. He could endure hunger. But he could not endure the thought of me being right. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands were trembling so badly he had to type the passcode twice. He opened the banking app. The balance showed exactly $500,000. It was the last remnant of the $4 million I had paid him for the house, the rest having already vanished into the black hole of Brad's gambling debts. "Transfer it to my personal account," Brad commanded, watching the screen like a hawk. "I have to withdraw it in cash to pay the vendors. They don't take checks on the weekend. Desmond hesitated one last time. You promise this covers everything. You promise the wedding happens tomorrow. I promise. Brad said, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. This fixes everything. We will be a family. We will be untouchable. Desmond pressed the button. Transfer complete. Brad let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. He patted Desmond on the cheek, a gesture that was patronizing and cruel. Good job, Dad. You just saved the day. Now get dressed. I have to go pay the piper. Brad grabbed his duffel bag from the floor. He didn't head toward the lobby to meet the wedding planner. He headed toward the service elevator. He walked with the urgent, choppy stride of a fugitive. I watched all of this from the security feed on my tablet, sitting comfortably in my own suite 3 floors above them. I took a sip of tea. The money was gone. Desmond was now completely, irrevocably broke, and Brad was on the move. I picked up my walkie-talkie. Target is moving. He has the package. He is heading for the parking garage. Do not engage yet. Let him think he made it. Brad reached his car, a rented Mustang convertible that he had specifically requested because he thought it made him look dashing. He threw the duffel bag into the passenger seat. Inside that bag was $500,000 of my money, essentially. He wasn't going to pay florists. He wasn't going to pay caterers. He was going to the airport. He had a one-way ticket to Cancun booked under the name John Smith. I knew this because I had hacked his email 3 days ago. He jumped into the driver's seat and gunned the engine. The roar of the exhaust echoed in the concrete cavern of the parking garage. He peeled out of the spot tires, screeching, and sped toward the exit ramp. I could see the look on his face through the windshield. It was pure euphoria. He was smiling. He was laughing. He thought he had pulled off the greatest con of his life. He had drained the Washington family dry, humiliated us, and now he was leaving us to deal with the wreckage while he sipped margaritas on a beach. He reached the top of the ramp, turning onto the private access road that led away from the resort and toward the highway. The rain was starting to fall now, heavy fat drops that splattered against the glass. He turned up the radio. He sped up, pushing 60-70 miles per hour. He was 5 miles from the highway, 5 miles from freedom. And then the road ended. 3 black SUVs were parked across the width of the asphalt, blocking the way completely. They were matte black, menacing, with no license plates. Brad slammed on the brakes. The Mustang fishtailed on the wet pavement, skidding sideways before coming to a halt just 10 feet from the blockade. Brad froze. He honked the horn. "Move!" he screamed, his voice muffled by the glass. "Get out of the way." The doors of the SUVs opened in unison. 6 men stepped out. They were not police. They were not resort security. They were private military contractors, large men with thick necks and earpieces, wearing suits that struggled to contain their muscles. They stood in a line, arms crossed, impassive as statues. Brad panicked. He threw the car into reverse, looking over his shoulder to back up. But another black SUV had pulled up silently behind him, blocking his retreat. He was boxed in. He was trapped. I stepped out of the rear vehicle. An umbrella was immediately opened over my head by a bodyguard, shielding me from the rain. I was wearing a white trench coat, pristine and sharp against the gloom of the storm. I walked slowly toward the Mustang, the sound of my heels lost in the thunder rolling overhead. Brad stared at me through the window. His face went from confusion to recognition to absolute terror. He locked the doors. He scrambled for his phone. I walked up to the driver's side window and tapped on the glass with a single manicured fingernail. "Roll it down, Brad," I mouthed. He shook his head, pressing himself against the passenger door, clutching the duffel bag of money to his chest like a shield. I signaled to the man closest to me. He stepped forward, pulled a baton from his belt, and with one efficient swing, shattered the driver's side window. The glass exploded inward, showering Brad in safety crystals. He screamed, covering his face. I leaned in, resting my elbows on the doorframe, ignoring the rain blowing into my face. "Going somewhere?" I asked pleasantly. "The wedding rehearsal is in an hour." "You are crazy!" Brad shrieked, brushing glass off his lap. "Let me go! I will call the cops." You can't hold me here. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh, bright and amused. Call them Brad, please. Dial 911. Tell them you are fleeing the scene with $500,000 you extorted from a senile old man. Tell them about the stolen identity you used to book your flight to Mexico. I am sure the FBI would love to offer you a ride to the airport. Brad froze, his hand hovering over his phone. He knew I knew. I reached into the car and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. You thought you could leave? I asked, my voice dropping the pleasantry. You thought you could take my money, humiliate my sister, wreck my family, and just drive away. It is not your money, he spat. Your father gave it to me. It is my money, Brad. I bought the house. I paid the $4 million. Desmond just acted as the courier. And that bag you are holding, that is my change. I reached over and grabbed the duffel bag. He tried to hold on to it, but the bodyguard reached in and squeezed Brad's wrist until he yelped and let go. I handed the bag to my security team. Now here is the situation, I said, leaning closer until our noses were inches apart. You are broke, you have no ticket, you have no money, and you have a debt in Atlantic City that is due on Monday. Brad went pale. How do you know about that? Because I bought it, I whispered. I bought the promissory note from the gentleman in New Jersey this morning. I paid them a premium to transfer the debt to me. So technically you don't owe the mob anymore. You owe me. And unlike the mob, I don't want your fingers, Brad. I want your obedience. Brad stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. You own my debt, every cent, principal and interest. And if you try to run, if you try to step 1 foot off this property, I will execute the default clause. I will have you thrown in a federal prison for fraud so fast your head will spin. Or I could just hand you back to the original lenders. They were very disappointed I paid them off. They were looking forward to visiting you. Tears started to well up in his eyes. What do you want? He sobbed. Why are you doing this? I want a wedding, I said, smiling. I want you to turn this car around. I want you to go back to the hotel. I want you to put on your tuxedo. And tomorrow morning I want you to stand at that altar and marry my sister. You are going to be the perfect groom. You are going to smile. You are going to cry tears of joy. You are going to make her feel like a princess. But I can't, he cried. I don't love her. This was just a job. I know, I said, cold as ice. That is why it is going to be your punishment. You wanted to marry into the Washington family for money. Congratulations. You got us. You are going to be my brother-in-law. You are going to live under my thumb for the rest of your miserable life. You will work where I tell you to work. You will live where I tell you to live. And if you ever make my sister cry again, I will ruin you so thoroughly that you will wish you had died in this car. I stepped back and gestured to the road behind him. The SUV blocking his retreat moved aside. Go back to the hotel, Brad. Don't be late for the rehearsal dinner. We are serving steak. Brad looked at me, then at the open road ahead that was now blocked by my men, and then at the rearview mirror. He realized he was trapped. The cage wasn't a cell. It was a marriage. He started the car, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the wheel. He turned the Mustang around, slowly, defeated a broken man driving back to his own execution. I watched him drive away, the taillights fading into the storm. I took the umbrella from the bodyguard and walked back to my car. The wind was howling now, tearing at my coat, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt the heat of total control. The money was recovered, the villain was captured, and the wedding was back on schedule. I got into the back seat of the SUV and opened the duffel bag. Stacks of $100 bills stared back at me. I zipped it up. This would make a nice wedding gift for Chloe. After all, she was going to need a safety net when she realized her husband was nothing more than a puppet on my string. Driver, take me back to the St. Regis, I said. I have a toast to prepare. As we drove back through the rain, I pulled out my phone and checked the group chat. My mother had just texted, "Where is Brad?" "The florist needs cash," I typed back. "He is on his way, Mom. He just went to get some fresh air. Everything is perfect." I put the phone away and watched the lightning strike the ocean. The storm was here, and I was the eye of it. The organ music swelled, filling the cavernous ballroom of the St. Regis with the triumphant notes of the wedding march. It was a sound designed to herald the arrival of royalty, but in this room it echoed off the walls with a hollow, mocking resonance. I sat in the front row on the bride's side, wearing a dress of blood-red silk, the only splash of color in a sea of empty white chairs. The turnout was catastrophic. My father, Desmond, had invited 300 of Atlanta's elite. He had promised the senator, the mayor, the bishops, and the tycoons. But after the video of him slapping me went viral, followed by the rumors of his insolvency, the RSVPs had turned into regrets faster than ice melting in the Georgia heat. The room was less than a third full, populated mostly by distant cousins who didn't have social media paid staff, and a few morbid curiosity seekers who were there solely to watch the train wreck. I turned my head slightly to watch the procession. My father walked down the aisle, his face a mask of rigid, desperate pride. He was forcing a smile that looked more like a rictus of pain. On his arm was Chloe. She looked breathtaking in a Vera Wang gown that cost more than most people's cars, but her eyes were frantic. She scanned the empty rows, her smile faltering, as she realized the cameras she had hired were filming a ghost town. She had dreamed of this moment since she was 5 years old. She had wanted to be the princess. Instead, she looked like a survivor walking through the wreckage of her own expectations. Waiting at the altar was Brad. He was sweating profusely despite the hotel's aggressive air conditioning. He kept tugging at his collar, his eyes darting toward the exits as if expecting a sniper. He looked nauseous. He knew that I was watching him. He knew that every step Chloe took brought him closer to a life sentence of servitude under my thumb. He forced a smile as Desmond handed Chloe over, but his hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped her veil. The minister, a man who clearly wished he was anywhere else, cleared his throat and began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words floated through the silent room. My mother, Patrice, was sobbing in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. They weren't tears of joy. They were tears of relief. She thought they had made it. She thought that once the rings were exchanged, the nightmare would end, the money would flow, and their reputation would be salvaged. She had no idea that I had reserved the best seat in the house for someone else. The minister droned on about love, commitment, and honesty. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I glanced at my watch. It was time. As the minister took a breath to ask the congregation the final question, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open with a sound like a thunderclap. The noise made everyone jump. Brad flinched so hard he nearly fell off the dais. Heads turned. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the light of the lobby, was a woman. She was blonde, dressed in a sharp navy suit, holding the hands of 2 young children, a boy and a girl. Flanking her was a man carrying a briefcase who looked like he billed $800 an hour. The minister paused, looking confused. "If anyone can show just cause why this couple may not be lawfully joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." "I object!" the woman screamed. Her voice was shrill, shaking with rage and heartbreak. She marched down the aisle, dragging the confused children with her. The click of her heels on the marble floor was the only sound in the room. Brad's face drained of all color. He looked like a ghost. He mouthed the word "no," but no sound came out. Chloe turned around, her veil tangling around her. "Who is that?" she hissed at Brad. "Who is she?" "That is my wife," the woman shouted, stopping 10 feet from the altar. She pointed a shaking finger at Brad. "That is my husband, and that is the father of these children." A collective gasp went through the sparse crowd. Phones were raised instantly. Live streams began. The few guests who had shown up were suddenly getting the show of a lifetime. Brad, tell her she is crazy, Chloe screamed, grabbing Brad's lapels. Tell them you don't know her. Brad couldn't speak. He was paralyzed. The lawyer stepped forward, opening his briefcase and pulling out a sheaf of documents. He handed them to the minister. This is a marriage certificate from the state of New Jersey, dated 6 years ago. The lawyer announced, his voice projecting clearly. It has not been annulled. It has not been dissolved. Mr. Bradley Remington is legally married to Mrs. Sarah Remington. Furthermore, there is an active warrant for his arrest regarding unpaid child support and abandonment. My mother stood up, clutching her chest. This cannot be true. He is a Remington. He is wealthy. He wouldn't do this. Sarah. Remington looked at my mother with pity and disgust. He isn't wealthy, lady. He drained our savings account and ran off 3 years ago. He is a con artist, and you almost let him do it to your daughter. Chloe looked at Brad. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The fake bag, the rental car, the constant need for cash, the secrecy. It all crashed down on her at once. Is it true? She whispered, her voice breaking. Brad looked at me. I was sitting there, calm, composed, sipping my water. He saw the slight smile on my face. He knew I had flown Sarah and her lawyer in on my private jet this morning. He knew I had orchestrated the timing perfectly. I can explain, Brad stammered. Chloe screamed. It was a primal, animalistic sound of pure humiliation. She lunged at him, her manicured nails aiming for his eyes. You liar! You ruined my life! Chaos erupted. Desmond tried to restrain Chloe, but she was thrashing wildly. The flower arch teetered and fell over, crashing onto the stage. The children started crying. Sarah was shouting at Brad. The guests were standing on their chairs to get a better view. And then the sirens began. They didn't start in the distance. They were right outside. The hotel doors burst open again, and this time it wasn't a scorned wife. It was the police. 6 officers in tactical gear, accompanied by 2 agents in FBI windbreakers, stormed into the ballroom. Nobody move, one of the agents shouted. Bradley Remington, put your hands in the air. Brad looked at the police, then at the angry wife, then at the hysterical fiancé. He realized there was no escape. He slowly raised his hands, tears streaming down his face. Chloe backed away, tripping over the train of her dress. The expensive lace ripped with a loud tearing sound, exposing the tulle underneath. She fell to the floor, surrounded by fallen petals and shattered dreams. The police marched up the aisle. They grabbed Brad, spun him around, and slammed him against the altar. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed through the room. Bradley Remington, you are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, bigamy, and interstate flight to avoid prosecution. The FBI agent read his rights. My father Desmond stood in the middle of the wreckage, looking like a man whose world had ended. He looked at the police dragging his future son-in-law away. He looked at his wife, who had fainted into a chair. He looked at his daughter sobbing on the floor in a ruined dress. And then he looked at me. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the silk of my red dress. I walked up to the altar, stepping over the broken flowers. I stood over Chloe. She looked up at me, her mascara running down her face in black streaks, her eyes filled with hatred and despair. You did this, she choked out. You brought her here. You called the police. I leaned down, my voice soft but audible enough for the cameras nearby to pick up. I didn't make him a criminal, Chloe. I just introduced you to who he really is. You wanted a fairy tale. I gave you the truth. I turned to the FBI agent. Officer, make sure you check his pockets. I believe he is carrying $500,000 in cash that belongs to my father. It was transferred yesterday under false pretenses. The officer patted Brad down and pulled a thick envelope from his inside jacket pocket. We will log this into evidence, Ms. Washington. Thank you for the tip. Brad was dragged out, screaming my name, cursing me, begging for mercy. Sarah and her lawyer followed, taking her children away from the scene of the trauma. The guests began to filter out, whispering excitedly, already posting the videos that would destroy what little remained of the Washington family reputation. I looked at my father. He was holding onto the podium to keep from falling over. "The wedding is over, Dad," I said. "And by the way, the check you gave the hotel for the reception, I unfroze your account for exactly 5 minutes this morning so it would bounce. You might want to leave before the manager comes looking for payment." I turned and walked back down the aisle alone. The wedding march had stopped long ago, replaced by the murmurs of scandal. I walked out of the ballroom past the shocked staff and into the bright, hot sunlight of the Atlanta afternoon. The payoff was complete, the illusion was shattered, but I wasn't done yet. I still had a house to evict them from, and I had a bus pass to deliver. The drive back from the disastrous wedding was a funeral procession for the living. My father, Desmond, drove the rented limousine himself because the driver had quit hours ago over unpaid wages. My mother, Patrice, sat in the back sobbing quietly into a napkin, while Chloe stared out the window still wearing her torn wedding dress, looking like a ghost haunting her own life. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. The humiliation at the St. Regis was total, but they clung to one last shred of hope. They still had the house. They still had the mansion on the hill. It was the only tangible thing left of their identity. But as the limousine turned the corner onto the private drive leading to the estate, that hope evaporated instantly. The driveway was blocked. Two large moving trucks were parked in front of the fountain. A black sedan with tinted windows sat ominously near the porch. And standing on the front steps where my father usually posed for his Sunday morning photos, was Arthur Sterling, the lawyer who had facilitated the sale of the Legacy House just days before. He was flanked by two armed security guards and a team of movers who were already stacking boxes on the lawn. Desmond slammed the car into park and scrambled out, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "What is this? Get off my property. I called the police an hour ago on a con artist, and I will call them on you too. You have no right to be here." Arthur Sterling didn't flinch. He adjusted his glasses and checked his watch, looking at my father with the detached pity one might feel for a dying insect. "Mr. Washington, I am afraid you are the one who has no right to be here. You are currently trespassing on private property owned by Phoenix Holdings." "Trespassing!" Desmond screamed, running up the steps. "I own this house. I built this house. The sale was for the brownstone downtown, not this mansion. Read the contract." "I have the contract right here," Arthur said calmly, holding up a thick document. "Clause 14, Section B, the cross-collateralization agreement. You signed it yourself, Desmond. It states clearly that if the funds from the sale of the Legacy House were not used to clear the liens on the title, or if the seller engaged in any fraudulent financial activity regarding the proceeds, the buyer reserves the right to seize the primary residence as liquidated damages." Desmond froze. He remembered the contract. He remembered signing it without reading the fine print because he was too blinded by the $4 million figure. He remembered handing that money to Brad. And he remembered watching the FBI confiscate that money as evidence of wire fraud just 2 hours ago. "But I didn't engage in fraud," Desmond stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "Brad did. He took the money. I was a victim." "Legally speaking," Arthur continued, flipping a page, "you were a co-conspirator. You transferred funds to a known felon to facilitate his flight. That is wire fraud, Mr. Washington. But even putting the criminal charges aside, you are in breach of contract. The penalty for breach is 3 times the sale price. That is $12 million, payable immediately." Desmond looked at his wife and daughter who had gathered behind him, terrified. "12 million. I don't have 12 million. The FBI took the cash." Arthur closed the folder with a sharp snap. "Exactly. Since you cannot pay the penalty, Phoenix Holdings has exercised its right to foreclose on the collateral. This house and everything inside it now belongs to my client. You have 30 minutes to collect your personal effects. Anything left after that time will be considered abandoned property and disposed of." "Number," Patrice shrieked, trying to push past the security guards. "My furs, my jewelry, you can't take them. This is America. You can't just throw people on the street." The guard blocked her path effortlessly. "Ma'am, please step back." Desmond looked around wildly. He needed money. He needed a loan. He needed a miracle. He pulled out his phone, his fingers slipping on the screen. I will fix this. I know people. I am Desmond Washington. I have friends in this town. He dialed the senator's private number. It rang once, then went to voicemail. He dialed again. Nothing. He called the bishop. The line was busy. He called his golf partner, the CEO of the regional bank. Hello? Desmond shouted into the phone when the man finally answered. Bill. Thank God. Listen, I am in a bit of a jam. A misunderstanding with a contract. I need a bridge loan. Just for 24 hours. I am good for it, Bill. You know me. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Bill spoke, his voice cold and distant. I saw the video, Desmond. The whole club saw it. You slapped your daughter. You are involved with that con man. My compliance officer just flagged your accounts. You are radioactive. Don't call me again. The line went dead. Desmond stared at the phone. He called his brother, sent to voicemail. He called the deacon of his church, blocked. He scrolled through his contacts, hundreds of names, people he had wined and dined, people he had impressed with his Bentley and his suits, and one by one they rejected him. The social capital he had spent a lifetime building had vanished in an afternoon. He was alone, truly and completely alone. He dropped the phone. It cracked on the pavement. He looked at Arthur. Please, just give us a week. We have nowhere to go. My daughter is in a wedding dress. Have some mercy. Arthur looked unmoved. My client is not interested in mercy, Mr. Washington. My client is interested in justice. And who is this client? Desmond spat his fear, turning back into anger. Who is this Phoenix Holdings, some vulture fund from New York? Some faceless corporation trying to gentrify my neighborhood? I want to talk to the owner. I demand to see the boss. Arthur smiled, a thin, razor-sharp smile. I thought you might say that. The owner is arriving now. A low hum filled the air. It was the sound of a 12-cylinder engine approaching. A white Bentley Flying Spur turned into the driveway. It moved slowly, parting the sea of moving trucks like a shark swimming through a school of fish. It was the same car my father had driven to my graduation. The same car he had claimed defined his success. Desmond watched it approach, his mouth hanging open. He recognized the license plate. It was the car the bank had repossessed from him weeks ago. The car stopped right in front of the steps. The driver's door didn't open. The rear passenger door opened. A bodyguard stepped out and extended a hand. And then I stepped out. I was no longer wearing the red dress from the wedding. I had changed into a sharp white power suit tailored to perfection. I wore dark sunglasses despite the fading light. I stood tall, looking at the house that had been my prison for 20 years. Desmond looked at me. Patrice gasped, clutching Chloe's arm. Zoe, Desmond whispered. What are you doing here? Did you come to help us? Did you pay the debt? I took off my sunglasses and looked him in the eye. I didn't pay the debt, Dad. I bought it. What? I walked up the steps, past the movers, past the security, until I was standing on the porch looking down at them. Phoenix Holdings. Phoenix rises from the ashes. Who do you think holds the match? I am the owner. I am the client. I am the one evicting you. No, Patrice cried. You can't do this. We are your family. We raised you. You raised me to feel worthless. I corrected, my voice steady. You raised me to believe that love was conditional on a bank balance. Well, guess what, Mother? I met the condition. I have the balance. And now I am setting the terms. I turned to Arthur. How much time do they have left? 14 minutes, Arthur replied, checking his watch. I looked back at my father. You heard him. 14 minutes. And Dad? I suggest you start with the guest house. I believe there is a cot in the shed you made me sleep on. It might fit in the trunk of that rental limo. Zoe, please. Chloe stepped forward, tears ruining her makeup. I have nowhere to go. Brad ruined me. I am your sister. I looked at Chloe. I looked at the torn lace of her dress. I felt a flicker of pity, but I extinguished it instantly. Mercy would not help them now. Only consequences would teach them. "You have feet, Chloe," I said coldly. "And you have a bus pass. I suggest you start walking." I clapped my hands and the movers surged forward, entering the house. They began carrying out sofas, paintings, and sculptures. I watched as they hauled out my father's favorite leather armchair, the one he sat in while he lectured me about my failures. They dumped it unceremoniously on the grass. Desmond stood there broken. The king of the castle had been deposed by the peasant he had ignored. He looked at me one last time, searching for any sign of the daughter who used to beg for his approval. But she was gone. She had burned away in the fire of his rejection. I turned my back on them and walked into my house. The air conditioning was running. It was cool. It was quiet. It was mine. I closed the heavy oak door, shutting out their pleas, shutting out the heat, and shutting out the past. I walked to the window and watched as they frantically stuffed clothes into black trash bags. The foreclosure was complete. The transaction was settled. And the ledger was finally balanced. I stood on the porch of the mansion that was now legally mine, holding a manila envelope that contained the final nail in the coffin of the Washington family legacy. The movers had finished clearing out the furniture, leaving the grand foyer echoing and empty behind me. My father Desmond stood at the bottom of the steps, a broken man in a wrinkled suit, flanked by my mother Patrice, who was shivering despite the heat, and Chloe, who was still clutching the tattered remains of her wedding dress. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and exhaustion, waiting for permission to leave, waiting for the nightmare to end. But I wasn't done. I walked slowly down the steps, the sound of my heels sharp and deliberate on the stone. "Before you go," I said, my voice calm, but projecting clearly across the silent driveway, "we need to discuss the jewelry." Patrice flinched physically, her hand flying to her throat. She looked at Chloe, panic flaring in her eyes. I saw Desmond frown, confused. "What jewelry?" he asked, his voice rasping. "We didn't take any jewelry." The movers watched us pack. "We only have clothes." I didn't take my eyes off my mother. "I'm not talking about today, Dad. I am talking about last night. I'm talking about the diamond choker, the Rolex, and the emerald studs that went missing from my guest house while I was at the charity gala." Desmond turned to his wife. "Patrice, what is she talking about?" "It is a lie!" Patrice shrieked, her voice cracking. "She is making it up. She is trying to frame us because she is vindictive." I opened the envelope and pulled out a high-resolution photograph. I held it up. It was a still frame from the security camera at Solomon's pawnshop downtown. It clearly showed Patrice and Chloe standing at the counter, handing over the items in exchange for a stack of cash. I pulled out another document. "This is the affidavit of sale signed by both of you. And this is the police report I drafted this morning but haven't filed yet. Grand larceny, burglary, conspiracy to commit a felony." Desmond looked at the photo, then at his wife. His face crumbled. "You stole from her," he whispered. "After everything, you turned us into common thieves. We needed the money." Patrice sobbed, collapsing onto the driveway gravel. "We were hungry. We needed a hotel." I stepped closer, looming over them. "You stole $40,000 worth of jewelry and sold it for $4,000. That is not desperation, Mother. That is stupidity. And now I have a choice to make. I can hand this file to the detective who is currently parked at the end of the street. If I do that, you and Chloe will go to prison. First offenses usually get probation, but given the value of the items and the premeditation, you are looking at 3 to 5 years. Chloe will give birth to her first child behind bars, assuming Brad ever got her pregnant." Chloe wailed, covering her face with her hands. "Please, Zoe. Don't. I will do anything. I will scrub your floors. I will work it off. I don't need a maid, Chloe. I have professional staff for that. I need peace. So here's the deal. I am offering you a plea bargain. Option A is prison. Option B is exile." I pulled a set of keys from my pocket and tossed them onto the gravel at Desmond's feet. These are the keys to the old caretaker's trailer on the plot of land grandfather left us in rural Alabama. It is run down, it has no internet, the nearest town is 10 miles away, but the rent is free. Alabama. Patrice gasped. I can't live in a trailer in Alabama. I am a socialite. You are a felon, I corrected sharply. And beggars can't be choosers. If you take the keys, I will not file the charges. I will give you a monthly stipend of $2,000. That is enough for food and utilities if you are careful. But there is a condition. You never come back to Atlanta. You never mention my name to the press. You never contact me again. If you do, if I see so much as a tweet from you, I will revoke the stipend and file the charges that same day. I looked at Desmond. He was staring at the keys in the dirt. The keys to a life of obscurity. The keys to the end of his ego. He slowly bent down his knees, cracking, and picked them up. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. The shame was a physical weight bending his spine. We take the trailer, he whispered. Good choice, I said. Now get off my property. They didn't have a car. The rental limo was gone. The Bentley was mine. They had nothing but 3 black heavy-duty trash bags filled with their clothes. Desmond hoisted one over his shoulder. Patrice grabbed hers, dragging it because it was too heavy. Chloe, barefoot now because her heels had broken, picked up the last one. They turned and began the long walk down the driveway. It was the same driveway where they had left me standing in the dust so many times. The same driveway where they had driven off in luxury, laughing at my expense. Now they were the refugees expelled from the paradise they had failed to appreciate. As they walked, the sky, which had been threatening all afternoon, finally opened up. It didn't start with a drizzle. It started with a deluge. A sudden, violent summer storm that turned the world gray and wet in seconds. I watched from the shelter of the porch as the rain soaked them instantly. Patrice's expensive silk blouse clung to her skin. Desmond's suit darkened. Chloe's wedding dress, already ruined, became a heavy, sodden weight, dragging in the mud, collecting leaves and dirt. They huddled together, heads down against the wind, looking like tragic figures from a cautionary tale. There was no dignity left, no defiance, just the brutal reality of consequence. They trudged toward the main gate, their figures getting smaller and smaller, blurring into the gray sheet of rain. I watched them until they reached the end of the driveway, turning onto the public road where the bus stop was located. The irony was perfect. They were going to catch the bus. The very mode of transport they had mocked me for using was now their only lifeline out of the city. I turned and walked back into the foyer. My driver, a quiet man named James, who used to drive for the senator, was waiting by the side entrance. The car is ready, Ms. Washington, he said. Thank you, James. Bring it around. I walked out to the portico, just as the white Bentley pulled up. James opened the rear door for me. I slid into the back seat. The interior smelled of rich leather and success. The air conditioning was set to a perfect 68 degrees. I settled back, the silence of the cabin wrapping around me like a protective cocoon. Take me to the airport, James. I have a flight to Paris tonight. Yes, ma'am. The car glided forward, the tires hissing on the wet pavement. As we approached the end of the driveway, I saw them. They were huddled under the small plastic shelter of the bus stop. They looked miserable, wet, shivering, defeated. The trash bags were piled at their feet, like monuments to their failure. Slow down, James, I said. The car slowed to a crawl as we passed the bus stop. I pressed the button on the door and the tinted window hummed down. Desmond looked up. His hair was plastered to his forehead. Water dripped from his nose. He looked at the car, then at me. His eyes were hollow. Patrice didn't even look up. She was staring at her muddy feet, weeping. Chloe was hugging herself, shaking violently from the cold. I looked at them, and I waited for a feeling of guilt. I waited for that old instinct to save them, to fix it, to beg for their love. But it didn't come. The only thing I felt was a profound sense of closure. The cord was cut. The debt was paid. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small plastic card. It was old, scratched, and faded. The edges were worn from years of use. It was the MARTA bus pass my father had thrown at me on the day of my graduation. The pass, he said, was for failures. I leaned out of the window slightly, the rain misting against my face. "Hey, Dad," I called out. He flinched, looking at me with a flicker of fear. I flicked my wrist and the card spun through the air, landing in a puddle right at the toe of his soaked dress shoe. "You dropped this," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Keep it. You are going to need it more than I do. Bentleys don't carry failures." I pressed the button and the window rolled up, sealing me back inside my world of warmth and power. "Drive, James." The engine purred a deep, throaty growl of horsepower and the car accelerated. I didn't look back. I didn't check the rearview mirror to see if he picked it up. It didn't matter. I opened my phone and checked my calendar. Paris in the morning, a board meeting in Tokyo next week. My life was vast, open, and entirely mine. The rain lashed against the back window, washing away the dirt, washing away the past, leaving nothing but the clean, open road ahead. The story of the girl on the bus was over. The era of the woman in the Bentley had just begun.